welcome back to She Investigates, the podcast where we investigate all things weird. I'm your host, Gwen Ross, and today we are going to be exploring mysteries of the skies. Yes, my friends, today is our first alien episode. But wait, don't turn off the episode yet, thinking that this episode isn't for you. As someone who used to not be a believer herself, all I'm asking is for a chance to convince you that there may be more out there than we even know. But first, let's catch up. So my son Ammon has been asking me for weeks if he could come and be on a segment of Let's Catch Up with me. And so I finally decided to bring him on this week. Say hi, Ammon.
Hi.
And the reason why I decided to bring him on this week is because the Super Bowl is on Sunday, and one of Ammon's very favorite things is
football.
And so we're going to do some fun Super Bowl predictions and picks. But first, I want you, Ammon, to tell us a little bit about your own football team.
My flag football team is called the Bengals. We recently had an undefeated season and won our Lakes Championship game. And we recently got invited to the National Flag Football Tournament in Dallas, Texas. And the winner of the championship teams that get to play in AT&T Stadium in Dallas, Texas, a.k.a. the Cowboy Stadium.
That is so awesome. His little flag football team is just so great. It's so fun watching him. So Ammon has so much football knowledge. He knows all of the NFL teams, all of their quarterbacks. Who is your favorite team in the NFL right now?
The Buffalo Bills.
And you live in Utah, so why is the Buffalo Bills your favorite team?
Because there are Utah players, the University of Utah players on the Bills. For example, Dalton Kincaid and Cole Bishop.
Awesome. And so the Buffalo Bills, they are out of Super Bowl contention this year, unfortunately. But I want to know what you thought about the Chiefs and Bills game.
I think the refs were totally on the Chiefs' side. There were some calls that were missed, some calls that shouldn't have been called. But the call that ticked me off the most was the Josh Allen QB sneak on 4th and 1. They went to the review booth to review if it was a first down or not. And at every single camera angle, the ball crossed the line. And the refs decided not to make it first down.
And do you think that was the difference between the Bills winning the game or not?
Yes, that was a huge difference.
Sorry, buddy, that was a bummer of a game. We'll get them next year. So this year, playing in the Super Bowl is going to be the Eagles and the Chiefs. So since the Bills can't win, who are you going to be cheering for?
I'm going to be cheering for the Philadelphia Eagles.
And why did you pick the Eagles?
Because I don't want the Chiefs to win 3 in a row. And because there's a Ute on the football team, the Eagles, Britton Covey.
And do you think that the Eagles have what it takes to beat the Chiefs?
Yes, I think that the Eagles have what it takes to beat the Chiefs. And the reason why I say that is because of the Eagles' new running back, Saquon Barkley.
Yeah, and this game is kind of a little bit of a rematch for the Eagles and the Chiefs, right?
Yeah, it is, from 2 years back, which the Chiefs won. And I think the Eagles are looking for revenge.
All right, well, I'm going to go with Ammon on this one. I'm also going to say the Philadelphia Eagles are going to take it this year. One last question for you, Ammon, before I let you go to bed. I'm just wondering, what are you going to be snacking on during the Super Bowl this year? What's your snack of choice?
The Lay's Original Chips.
Okay, all right. And what are you going to be drinking during the game?
Soda. And the type of soda? Fanta. See ya.
All right. Thanks so much for being here, Ammon. And go Eagles.
Yeah, go Eagles.
And with that, let's jump into today's episode. As I mentioned, I used to not really be a believer in aliens. It just seemed so unlikely to me that there were like these little green men visiting us in spaceships. And let me make something really clear. I'm still not really sure what aliens look like and why they're visiting us and even where they came from. But I do believe that there are way too many people seeing things in the skies to write these off as simply weather balloons or flares or any of the other excuses that the government has given us when they've been asked to look into this. With that said, it is a lot easier to believe something when there's multiple witnesses. In any case that's presented in a court of law, the strength of the case depends heavily on one thing, and that is the number of witnesses to the crime who are willing to testify. The same is true when it comes to matters of paranormal activity. So today, we are going to explore multiple cases where UAPs, or unidentified aerial phenomenon, were seen by multiple witnesses. Our first story takes place in Florence, Italy. It happened about 70 years ago at the Stadium Artemio Franchi, a 47,000-seater outside of Florence, Italy, that was and still is home to the Fiorentina football, or as we Americans call it, soccer club. This stadium opened in 1931, and it was the site of World Cup matches and concerts alike. On New Year's Day in 1945, it even hosted the Spaghetti Bowl, which was a morale-boosting gridiron game between the American Fifth Army and the 12th Air Force during their drive against Nazi Germany. On October 27, 1954, the home team soccer club was playing their local rivals. Suddenly, a hush fell over the stadium, and the eyes of the spectators moved from the field to the skies. An egg-shaped object was performing a series of maneuvers in the sky for close to 15 minutes before vanishing again. Not only were the fans invested in figuring out what this could be, but the players themselves gaped at the sky, and the referees actually had to suspend play. Even weirder, a silver filament substance fell from the sky and covered the stadium before disintegrating. Magnini was a defensive player with Fiorentina. When asked about the event at the game, he said, quote, "It was something that looked like an egg that was moving slowly, slowly, slowly. We were astonished. We had never seen anything like it before. We were absolutely shocked," end quote. Another player, Romolo Tucci, had this to say, quote, "In those years, everybody was talking about aliens. Everybody was talking about UFOs, and we had the experience. We saw them. We saw them directly for real," end quote. While most of the witnesses came from this soccer game, the event was not confined just to the stadium. It was observed all over Florence. People all over were seeing these shiny, silvery cotton balls in the air. And luckily, before this weird substance completely disintegrated, some of it was collected to be tested. And the lab results showed that the substance contained boron, silicone, calcium, and magnesium. Neither boron or silicone are biological compounds, meaning that they're not found in living organisms. So this was confusing to everyone. Everyone, that is, except James Magaha, a U.S. Air Force pilot turned astronomer. He seemed to know exactly what was going on. His explanation? Spider migration. Yep, this strange event could all easily be explained as just spiders on the move. He is quoted as saying, quote, "The whole spectacle was nothing more than migrating spiders, young spiders spinning webs. They use these webs as sails, and they link together, and you get a big glob of this stuff in the sky, and the spiders ride on this to move between locations. These things have been recorded at 14,000 feet above the ground. So when the sunlight glistens off this, you get all kinds of visual effects," end quote. This did take place in the fall, which is when it's migration season for spiders. But most people that saw this event had a really hard time writing this off as just a giant spider web. And then there's the lab results. Spider silk is protein-based, and these biological chemicals weren't identified in the lab. One fan, Gigi Boni, summed it up best, I think. About the event, he said, quote, "I think they were extraterrestrial. That's what I believe. And there's no other explanation I can give myself," end quote. Moving on, our next event takes place on March 13th, 1997, when at around 7 p.m., people near Phoenix, Arizona witnessed strange lights in the sky. Now, this is one of the biggest UFO cases of all time, strictly because of how many witnesses there were. Many reported seeing a string of 5 lights in a V formation, and calls started coming in immediately into the National UFO Reporting Center at around 8:16 p.m. One call was from a retired police officer, and he reported seeing, quote, a cluster of red-orange lights arranged in a V formation. There were reportedly over 700 witnesses to this event, including pilots, police officers, and military officials. A lot of people describe the lights as part of a singular or a massive craft that made no noise. A man named Terry Proctor captured one of the only videos of this event. Around 10 p.m., a second set of lights, as many as 9, appeared in the sky, hovering in the same spot. So, were both of these sightings legit, or was everybody just kind of on high alert after the first sighting and mistook something with an easy explanation as mysterious? Or were they the same thing both times? A laser printer technician witnessed the event from his yard, and he said, quote, we could see the outline of a mass behind the light, but you couldn't actually see the mass. It was more like a gray distortion of the night sky, wavy. I don't know exactly what it was, but I know it's not a technology the public has heard of before, end quote. According to an article from USA Today, air traffic controllers could not see the lights on radar, despite seeing them with their own eyes in the sky. Based off of reports, we know a couple of things about the lights. They seemed to be part of an enormous spacecraft that made no sound, moved slowly, and occasionally hovered overhead of an area. Witness Sue Watson described it as, quote, a shopping mall flying over my home. It had these lights in front, and then it was totally illuminated underneath, like a yellowish amber. It was a totally rounded boomerang shape, end quote. The light illuminated off and on for a few minutes while floating in a V formation. Computer analysis of the objects put it at about 6,000 feet long, or more than a mile. So on May 6th, during a council meeting, City Councilwoman Frances Barwood asked City Manager Frank Fairbanks if there was going to be an investigation into this. She said, quote, I asked if anybody knew what the object was, and could we check into it. It was met by a whole bunch of stares, end quote. Following the meeting, a city manager approached her and said, you shouldn't have asked that question. Then a political cartoon was drawn of Councilwoman Francer with a light switch on her forehead and a button that said, I love UFOs. She was basically just mocked and ridiculed all over the mayor's office and in the media just for wanting to look into this mysterious sighting and try to find out what it was. But this did not deter her. She began receiving phone calls from witnesses all describing the same thing. And for a while, the government just chose to ignore the incident altogether. Another witness to the event, a truck driver named Bill Grainer, said, quote, you know what it's like in the city right now? It's like having 50,000 people in a stadium watch a football game and then having someone tell you you weren't there, end quote. 3 months later, a USA Today article recounted the event and finally brought it into the national spotlight. The article said, quote, so far there is no explanation, but the government is not investigating. Local and federal agencies disagree over who should purse the report, end quote. So the governor at that time, Fife Symington, then held a press conference in which he claimed to know who was responsible and brought out the accused. Basically, this was just a big joke. Somebody was brought out in an alien costume and everybody had a good laugh. He was basically just dismissing everyone that thought that this might be some type of alien encounter. But interestingly enough, Governor Symington would go on later to admit that he actually saw the lights in the craft himself that night as well. In a Fox News article, Symington said he did not acknowledge his own encounter at first because he didn't want people to panic. The former governor, who faced fraud charges at the time, also said he did not need the additional problems such an admission would have created. So basically, he was just trying to protect his own reputation. He is quoted as saying, "I'm a pilot and I know just about every machine that flies. It was bigger than anything I've ever seen. It remains a great mystery. Other people saw it. Responsible people. I don't know why people would ridicule it," close quote. Which is weird to me because it seems like he was the one that was doing the most ridiculing, but whatever. It also came out that his office had in fact inquired about the object, but they never received an answer about what it was. There's only really two theories in this case. The official explanation from the Air Force was that they were merely flares dropped in a training exercise from high altitude that night. However, the base that was supposedly carrying on this training, the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, originally stated that they had no planes in the air at the time. The military reportedly dropped flares around 10 p.m., the same time as the sighting of the second sets of lights. But what about the first set of lights that were seen 3 hours earlier? One witness, Mitch Stanley, claimed he was using a high-powered telescope at the time of the first sightings of lights, which is capable of seeing 15,000 times more light than the human eye. When he looked at the first set of lights, he claims they were planes. Now, this is odd because no planes were reported being in the area during the first sighting, let alone 5 planes flying in a tight formation. This also doesn't really track for me because you're telling me that this random dude just happened to have his high-powered telescope out that night at the perfect time to see these objects through it. The second theory is that the lights were not flares, but UFOs and proof of extraterrestrial life. On the 3rd anniversary of the sightings, the military actually decided that they were going to conduct another flare drop to try to recreate the lights and to prove to people that that is what they were seeing. But their plan didn't work, and people remained unconvinced. Jim DeLetta, a special effects expert, analyzed the video of this event with his team, and they were able to rule out holograms, lasers, flares, and aircraft lights. On March 14, 1997, just a day after the sightings, an unidentified airman claimed that the base got a call from Prescott Valley Airport on the night that the lights were seen, reporting on an object that had had a near miss with a Cessna. He claimed the call came in at 8:32 p.m., that they'd encountered something over the Phoenix area. He claimed that the Air Force sent 2 F-15s to investigate. When they returned to the base, the airman described one of the pilots of the F-15 as being, quote, scared to death. He's not sure what it was. His statement was that they followed this craft. It went on a straight line course. He saw 5 distinct lights in a triangular pattern, end quote. The airman claimed after this revelation, the Air Force Base had a complete lockdown and the facility was closed. This encounter occurred around 8:30 p.m. at the time of the first sighting and a full hour and a half before the military claims they dropped flares. The Air Force denied this ever took place. Surprise, surprise. To this day, no one really knows what it was that people saw in the Arizona sky that night, but no one can deny the amount of witnesses to this strange phenomenon. Our last sighting takes place on August 21st, 2004, in Tinley Park, Illinois, when many people were taking advantage of the warm summer weather. They were at barbecues, having block parties, and attending outdoor concerts. But as people began to look up, they realized that there were 3 strange lights in the sky. These lights were observed by thousands of people. Sightings ranged from Tinley Park all the way to the southern part of Chicago. Reports started pouring in at around 7 p.m. These lights seemed to be flying in a V formation, just like the Arizona lights, and sometimes in a straight line. They moved silently over Tinley Park and were visible for about 30 minutes. By 9 p.m., reports were coming in from not just Tinley Park, but the surrounding areas as well. That night, there happened to be an outdoor concert that was being performed at a local amphitheater by Ozzy Osbourne called Ozfest. So as people started leaving the concert, traffic ground to a halt, and people that were waiting in this traffic started seeing the lights in the sky as well. What makes this particular sighting exceptionally strange is that people weren't just seeing lights in Tinley Park and the surrounding areas, but all over the world in a generally short period of time. 2 days before, similar lights were spotted in British Columbia, Canada. Then in Minnesota. The day after, the same lights appeared in Houston. And video footage was also captured in Melbourne, Australia, of the same type of lights the very next day. Luckily, this particular sighting in Tinley Park was captured by a lot of people. It is very well documented. There are all kinds of videos and photographic evidence. There's actually over 30 videos that exist of this event that happened. Jason Freeman was a reporter at the Southtown Star at the time of the event, and he described his experience of seeing the lights in his column in the paper. He said, quote, "I got out of my car to try as hard as I could to get a better look of the anomalies. What exactly was it that I and hundreds of other Tinley residents saw that night? I'm not sure, although I would definitely classify the lights as unidentified flying objects," end quote. The police department said definitively at the time that the lights were not flares or weather balloons. Nothing was registering on the radar that night as well. There's actually 2 airports within 35 miles of Tinley Park, the O'Hare Airport and the Midway Airport. But radar operators at both airports picked up nothing in the area. So this also rules out commercial or private planes. Skeptics blamed the sightings on, once again, flares. The team from History Channel's show, UFO Hunters, set out to determine if that was the answer, or if what people were seeing was truly unidentified flying objects on episode 2 of season 1. They explored commercial, private, and military flights and were able to rule them out as possibilities. The local airbase, which is roughly 100 miles away, claimed they had no documentation of the incident happening at all, which is very strange. TJ Japcon, a local witness who was having a barbecue at the time, managed to capture the sighting on tape for 18 minutes. The slow pace and hovering of the objects seen in this video make it pretty clear that this is not your typical aircraft. A police officer friend of TJ stopped by the party and was questioned by TJ and his guests. They were like, "What is going on?" But he actually had to quickly leave the party due to the number of calls that the local police station was getting about the lights. He had to go into work. After about 30 minutes, the lights disappeared as quickly as they had appeared. Then at about 11:30, TJ had another spotting, a single red point of light that appeared to be in the same spot as the earlier lights. Another witness, Bob Peterson, saw the lights from his own backyard. He says that at first he thought the lights were helicopters, but as they got closer, they were dead silent. His neighbor, Bill Dooley, also recounted seeing the lights. He admits that at first he thought maybe it was flares, but thought that it was weird that he didn't see any smoke. Those that thought the lights were some type of, quote, hoax, thought them to be simply flares attached to balloons. There's never been any official explanation, but on that same episode that I talked about earlier of UFO Hunters, they did a test using weather balloons and flares to try to recreate what people saw that night. And they actually brought in Bill Dooley and Bob Peterson, along with other witnesses that were actually there on the night of the sighting and knew what it looked like firsthand to witness this experiment. They also brought in the very same cameras that they used to film it that night to film this experiment. And all of the witnesses said that there were major differences between the lights that they saw and the lights that they created in this experiment using flares and weather balloons. So fast forward to September of the following year, 2005, and guess who's back? The reddish-orange lights appeared over Tinley Park that night and were seen by multiple people. Then again in October 2005 on Halloween night. Despite all the video from these multiple sightings, countless witness accounts, and the experiments performed by the UFO hunters, the strange lights remain just as they were on the night that they appeared, unidentified. And so, whether you've been donning a tinfoil hat for years or are a skeptic, it's hard to argue with the witness statements of thousands of people. Not to mention that in recent years, the government has even begun to form task forces and call hearings to discuss this threat to our nation's safety. This is a huge step forward in figuring out just what these sightings are. In the past, people were ridiculed at just the mere suggestion of seeing a UFO in the sky. But now I feel like it's becoming more common and even somewhat normal. Be it visitors from outer space or something else foreign and unidentified, I think that we can all agree that these objects do pose a very real threat to our security. We need to know what they are and why they're there, and most importantly, if they're our friend or our foe. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I really want to know what you guys think about this. Are you guys alien believers? Do you think these sightings are real or hoaxes? Have you guys ever seen something strange in the skies at night? And most of all, do you guys want to hear more episodes like this? Let me know on the Instagram post for this episode at She Investigates Pod on Instagram. And if you guys enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts and giving us a 5-star review. Until next time, I'll be snooping so you don't have to. This is She Investigates, signing off.